a few moments now and connect with the sacred, with Source, each in our own way, according to our own beliefs, philosophy, spirituality. Divine that is one, divine that is many, divine that is known by many names. Great Mother, Great Father, Great Spirit, Goddess and God, Source, Creator, Reason, Higher Power, Inner Light, Nature, Love, and more. Divine, we call to you and honor you. Bless us and guide us, now at this Samhain time and in times to come. So be it. And now, in the next few moments of quiet, let us remember beloved dead, especially those who have died in the past year. And let us silently give thanks for them being part of us and our lives. And now let us call to mind our descent from our ancestors of the ancient past. And consider ancestral heritage of awareness and alignment with changing seasons. Finally, let us call to mind and have compassion in our hearts for others remembering, grieving, reflecting on beloved dead. Peace. Amen. Namaste. Aho. Ashe. Shalom. Blessed be. So as we look around and see us all gathered here today, I invite you to think about how, by coming to this talk, and exploring Samhain and Halloween celebrations, you're actually continuing something that it's likely your ancestors did way back in time. I could say we're all hereditary pagans. I don't know if you want to own that word, pagan, from the Latin pagani, dweller in the country. And actually today, the people that are using the pagan word may or may not be dwelling in the country. Actually, most are dwelling in cities and villages and suburban areas. Some of us are in the country. But if we go back into ancient times, it was commonplace that after the harvest was done, whether it was a Celtic people or not, that one would give thanks for the harvest and one would prepare for winter. So in looking at celebrating Samhain and Halloween, it really begins with agriculture, and it begins with the changing of the seasons. The tradition is that as the vegetation dies off, and for farmers that are meat eaters, most of whom were, there was culling the herds. So literally there was death in the air. And because of that, this was an opportunity for humans to really take a look at the life cycle. Birth, life, death, and for most humans, the idea of rebirth, that there is an afterlife. Beliefs about this really changed and grew depending on the people in the era, but the idea at late October, beginning of November in the Northern Hemisphere being a time for telling tales of death, remembering the dead, that's something quite ancient. And it informs Samhain celebrations today, not only in pagan churches, but in UU churches, because within the UUA there are many different communities, fellowships, congregations that are working with that seventh principle of respect for all life and weaving into one celebration the celebration of changing seasons. So the idea that life is a circle, and it not only includes being in this world, but there is the circle of life that goes beyond, is something very ancient. How did the Celts celebrate Samhain? We know that there was an honoring of the beloved dead. There were also bonfires, huge bonfires. And the other half of the year, end of April, beginning of May, was known as Beltane. And these folks were agricultural people, had livestock, and sometimes that livestock was driven between two large bonfires filled with wood and herbs and other things that not only symbolically purified, but actually did a for real physiological purification. Wormwood, for example, fumigant was one of the things added to some of those fires. And so it'd get the bugs off and help clean out the livestock as they went through. Humans would go through the bonfires as well. In some parts of England today, the old Samhain bonfire is still alive and well, but it's called Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night. And it's tied to a thwarted plot to blow up Parliament. So on November 5th, if you honor about that, you will find across England many, many bonfires. Okay, there was a historical problem-solving opportunity with the government. But way before Guy Fawkes ever looked at some violent ways of changing government, there was this tradition of kindling big bonfires. And bonfires are continuing to be part of this celebration. At our own church Circle Sanctuary, we have multiple bonfires, but we have what I call the huge bonfire. After we have a time of honoring our dead, and we do meditation. We look into the year to come because it's our spiritual new year. We go out and have a great celebration with huge flambeau, and it's the joyful part of the Samhain time. Do you celebrate Samhain? Do you celebrate Halloween? For myself, I celebrate both. From a young age, I always was intrigued by Halloween. The pumpkins, the costumes, the going door to door, the tales. I've never been big on the gory part of Halloween. I know some people find it cathartic to watch some of those slasher movies. I deal with enough social justice things during my day-to-day life that I prefer to be entertained rather than reminded of blood and gore and things. But unfortunately, some of the pop culture Halloween has brought that, I guess, more grisly side to the forefront. But if we really look back to the ancient times, it was solemn and it was sacred, but it was also joyful. And the prankster part has been part of things all along, but the real focus has been community celebration. The harvest is done. Let's get together. Let's have a good time before winter sets in. And let's pay respects to those who have gone before. And let's teach our kids about how we need to remember those who have been with us and look forward to the future. So in many communities, Samhain was a time not only for honoring the dead, honoring the end of harvest, but it was a time for looking ahead for the future, just as you will find in New Year's celebrations in other times of year in other people's other cultures. So within contemporary Wiccan communities, Druidic communities, and yes, UU pagan communities, in addition to having an altar or a table setting with pictures and mementos, heirlooms of those who have died in the past year, and other deceased loved ones, usually interspecies, not just humans, but if there's been a favorite cat or dog or other companion creature, also honored. There was a time as part of the celebration of looking ahead for the future. And sometimes this was done meditatively. Sometimes it was done with some type of aid. We have a series of cards we're going to be using this year, oracle cards, each with a message, a positive message for life and the future. And as part of our celebration, there'll be a time where people can reach in. We repurpose those trick-or-treat plastic cauldrons and put in some message cards and have people draw one to reflect on what can come into one's life in the coming year. So there is a way of looking ahead as well as looking in the back and having a good time with each other. Indeed, community is one of the real focal points of Samhain and Halloween celebrations over time. So originally there was Samhain, and there were some comparable holidays that happened amongst people that weren't Celtic. Not only those who were Nordic or Germanic, what today would be called the heathen traditions, but in some parts, other parts of the world, including in Mexico, the Days of the Dead tradition, November 1st and 2nd, and multiple days around that time. There was a combining of some Christian observances at this time of year with indigenous observances at this time of year, which actually went on for several weeks prior to European contact, a time for honoring the dead. In the Middle Ages, the old pagan holidays continued to be celebrated, but they were recycled and renamed as Christian holidays. So All Saints' Day, November 1st, All Souls' Day, November 2nd, were ways of having people converge to honor the dead. All saints for the saints within the Catholic Church and the Christian Church as a whole. All souls, everyone else. Sometimes All Saints' Day was called Hallows. So Halloween is All Hallows Eve. It's a nickname for that. And that name is now the name for what I call a multicultural, interreligious, multilingual, secular folk holiday for kids and all who are young at heart. There's been, you've heard of the so-called war on Christmas that some people bring up as a political angle. In December, instead of peace on earth, there is war on Christmas debate. Well, some would say there's a war on Halloween. Actually, some people have tried to take Halloween out of schools, saying this is a pagan holiday, we need to get rid of it. Or some call it devil's holiday. No, pagans do not worship the devil. I was raised fundamentalist Southern Baptist, so I know what the devil is about, and I don't want to be parts of that oppressive, lying, patriarchal, wannabe God form. No, that's not part of my experience of nature religion, nor others that I know. But there's been an attempt to get rid of the fun from public school systems. Well, there's all sorts of debate about whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. I think it was one of my highlights of my youth was being able to celebrate Halloween and to dress up and have a good time, be part of the community. In fact, when I grew up in the 50s, the Southern Baptist Church that I was part of had trick-or-treating at the church. It was considered a good thing, a normal thing, a fun thing, a family thing for people to do. I've recently learned that in addition to trick-or-treat, that some churches that have some concerns about the magical sides of trick-or-treat have something called trunk-or-treat. Has anyone gone to a trunk-or-treat? I learned about this just a few days ago. What people do, they come into the church parking lot and they have candy in the trunks, and all the kids from all the families all go to the church parking lot and go trunk to trunk to trunk to trunk to get the candy. So I guess where I'm at is, well, that sounds like something interesting, and maybe if I could actually get invited to one of these events and they don't think I'm the devil incarnate or whatever, or that I will melt, I would like to actually experience a trunk or treat. Yeah.
Also, in the one that I went to, the adults bring household goods and things that they made a list of the last time they were at church, and they go trunk to trunk and grab those household goods that they need.
Well, yeah, and part of Halloween, and before that Samhain, there was some redistribution of the wealth. There was a charity dimension, and I'm all for that. What I'm hoping is we can move beyond Halloween wars of a political kind and really embrace it as something that has evolved in pop culture as a fun time for people to blow off some steam, to be together, to have a good time. And I see it as a psychotherapeutically as well as spiritually healthy thing to do, to have people have a good time before winter sets in. What I'd like to do in the next few moments is share some customs, and then what I'd like to do is have this be interactive in our last few moments together, where those of you who celebrate Samhain or Halloween or both will have a chance to share some of your observances. Pumpkins, where did that come from? Before there were pumpkins, there were turnips. And people would carve big turnips, not tiny turnips, big turnips. They would carve faces in the turnips. Old Ireland, Old Scotland, as part of Samhain observances, take a spark from the fire and put them in and use it as a way of, one version, honoring the dead, other version, warding off the dead that has not found peace. You know, it's like a ghost busting technique. So there were turnips, but once America came into the mix, the New World had pumpkins. They were already pretty hollow, and all you have to do is carve off the top, scoop out the seeds, easier to carve, more convenient and bigger. So jack-o'-lanterns are now widespread. Those of us who celebrate Samhain use them. Those who celebrate Halloween use them. And it's wonderful. I always get pumpkins and put them on the doorstep. Corn stalks, symbol of the harvest. I also use harvested mullein tapers that are sometimes known as crone's tapers or witches' candles, or in some traditions, Jupiter's rods. They are a biennial plant, and you get these huge stalks. So if you aren't near a cornfield, but you have some mullein growing, well, you can use that as a substitute. People like to decorate their homes up. In fact, in America, in addition to the Yuletide holiday season, there is now this whole growth industry in terms of all things Halloween. It's greeting cards and decorations and lights. I'm not saying it's great, it's getting commercialized, but I'm pointing it out that so many people are now celebrating that people are making their whole living off of Halloween celebrations. Something that we do at Circle Sanctuary is we will go to our church cemetery at least once during our Samhain gathering and put out an offering for those who have crossed on in the past, whether they have remains there or not. We do what we call the spirit plate and spirit cup. As I talked with the young people about that tradition of setting a place setting at one's home table, well, we have that on our main altar. And during our feasting, on our main day of our festival, which will be November 1st this year, we'll take a bit of the food that's being served. We have a huge potluck at midday, and a bit of the beverages. And then on Sunday morning, we go to the cemetery, we set down our offerings, and then we go to each of the grave sites and honor the memory of those who have remains there, as well as each year we tend to inter some ashes or dedicate a stone. So we'll be doing that this year. In the Days of the Dead tradition, it was customary to go to the family cemetery, to wash the graves, to decorate the graves, to clean them, and then to have a picnic there. And that is still done, not only in Mexico, but in many parts of the world. A whole idea of visiting cemeteries is something that's very ancient and commonplace. I think an excellent tradition is to go and talk with living relatives and get at least one story of someone who's no longer alive that you're related to actually do some family history at this time of year. And of course, it is Wisconsin. Winter preparations, also something that happens a lot at this time of year. So whether it is, well, it's time to mulch the flower beds, it's time to seal up the windows, to have some what we call household prep celebration and work to get ready for the winter is another important thing to do. And finally, one of the customs I do every year is public education. If you go online and you go to the religion page of the Huffington Post, you will see me doing some public education this year, talking about witch garb and how that can be recycled to teach people that many of the people that are using that witch word to talk about Wiccan spirituality and pagan religion are closer to Glinda the Good than, than the horrific images that so often get paraded out. Wizard of Oz was a really amazing movie, but the witch that got the bad and big role, yes, if you watched Wicked, the musical, you'll get the backstory on that. But unfortunately, too many people, when they hear the word witch, think about the one after Dorothy and her little dog, rather than the good one that teaches about the power being within oneself. So those are some thoughts about Samhain and Halloween, and we have a couple moments before we do our closing chant. And who has a question?
Or wants to tell.
Or a comment? Or a custom to share?
Well, one thing you didn't mention was one thing I saw over at the farmer's market yesterday, squash. And there are, here we are really health food nuts. So we know that pumpkins are healthy and, there we go. And squash is healthy. And so you go over there and you got your butternut squash, and you got your spaghetti squash, and you got your festival color squash, and your pimply squash, wart squash. And it's just so fun to look at, and you think, why don't people carve those things up? And then after that, you can bake them up, and you got a real treat afterward. So.
Well, and there are a number of people who will be celebrating Samhain and or Halloween by doing that kind of baking and serving of things that are in season. In fact, apples are one of the most popular of the delicacies at this time of year. And a tradition in a number of pagan circles is to take an apple and cut it in half horizontally, open it up, and you see a 5-pointed star in there. And within the Wiccan tradition, the 5 points of the star: earth, air, fire, water, spirit, the body, the mind, the will, the emotions, the soul, and being in balance and harmony. In fact, there might be some apple treats after we do this. Yeah.
This is actually just a quick announcement. John and I are hosting that Samhain celebration, and I noticed that the RSVP email was wrong, so if you could just tell Liz or me or John, and guests are definitely welcome to come to that. The information is on the back, but the RSVP info was, I don't know, somehow I got the wrong email, so.
Do you want to share a tradition you're going to be doing at the ceremony?
We will be definitely calling the directions, and we will do a remembrance of the ancestors, and it's always been a very meaningful ritual, and we will have some kind of a bonfire as well. So dress warmly, because we'll try to do it outside, and then we have a potluck feast after, which I guess is kind of the treat part.
That's the treat part.
I've heard on a number of occasions about this time of year being when the veil is thinnest for contacting those who have passed or whatever. Could you just say a word or two about that?
Yes, that idea about the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead, that's old lore. You're going to see it in folk songs, you're going to see it in paintings, in legends, and part of that really comes from what's happening in nature. Leaves are falling off the tree, vegetation's dying back, hard frost. The idea that vegetation is going into the other world, and as I mentioned before, with farm animals, sometimes the herd was cold at that time because there wasn't that much stored food to keep the herd alive, so people would have big feasting for that. And I think too, as it gets chillier, people really want to be alive and to thrive, and being aware that death can be unpredictable. So there's a whole preparing for winter piece but there's also a time to just really think about who has died in the past year, who loved ones that one hasn't seen for a long time can come to mind. And I actually think it's really a healthy thing to have people take some time out and do a kind of remembrance as nature is showing us a death side. But there's seed release, there is rebirth. That's part of the equation. Good question. Well, and I think too, you know, the things that go bump in the night and the ghost stories and all of the haunted houses really are rooted in the idea that there's something beyond this world. You know, so there can be kind of a playful dimension to that, but there's also a real serious piece about it. And the tradition that I've taught people and that I do myself is take a look at what you want to have happen with your body, your end of life preparations. Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Some people write the wrong obituary at Samhain time or revise it, kind of look over. So it can be a life review time and can be a time where one can talk with loved ones about death. Not everybody's real comfortable talking about death, and a good thing that can come out of Samhain is to remember the dead, but to also come to terms with death as part of the cycle of life in nature as a whole and in our own lives.
Something I remember from my childhood was, I think, sort of an extension of the giving back or the collecting from the needy. I remember it was trick-or-treating for UNICEF, and it was in the 50s and 60s, I think it's disappeared, but the idea was to gather for those children around the world who had needs.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And charity things still happen at this time, which is keeping alive not only an old pagan tradition, but a Christian tradition, and now it's kind of more of a universal tradition. Well, I will be available during our social at the end, so if you have more questions or things to share, I invite you to do so then. So I have a closing chant. And if you all are open to actually rising up for this one and joining our hands in a circle, it's a real simple one. We're going to be somewhat circular. we're going to... Well, we've got ways that we're all linked together. This is pretty circular. We're being Unitarian, Universalist, open circle, creative circle here. There are circles within circles and interconnectedness. Yeah, so this is wonderful. So the words are real simple. There's no end to the circle, no end. There's no end to the circle, no end. There's no end to love. There is no end. There is no end to love. There is no end. And this is part of a much longer chant and song developed by the reclaiming community, Starhawk. Many of you know about our social activism out in California, which is celebrating its 35th anniversary at Samhain. So this is a big anniversary time. And I adapted it with There's No End to Love, There Is No End, because I know that this series of compassion is unfolding in this community here. And this is a way to let love and Samhain converge. And the melody goes like this. There's no end to the circle, no end. There is no end to love, there is no end. There is no end to the circle, no end. There is no end to love, there is no end. There is no end to the circle, no end. There is no end to love, there is no end. There is no end to the circle, no end. There is no end to love, there is no end. We give thanks to the divine as one and as many. to the divine circle of nature. We give thanks to this sacred place and this sacred time. We give thanks to our ancestors and beloved dead. We give thanks to each other, as we're looking around, and to this UU Fellowship community. Blessings of wellness, wisdom, peace, joy, and love be in us and around us at Samhain tide now and in times to come. So be it. Amen. Have a great celebration wherever you are. Thank you so much. Many blessings.